going to wager that you have heard a lot of gutsy claims about the quality of play in the National Football League over the past 365 days. Week 18, best final weekend in NFL history. Divisional round, best playoff weekend in NFL history. Now I'm seeing the comment section of YouTube that this is the best year of football in NFL history, and so I have to analyze one of these claims, and what I'm going to get ahead of, what I'm going to analyze is, was Week 15, this special weekend of football, the best in NFL history? Because you know that's what people are going to be saying this week, and we got to take a look at it. In order to analyze the weekend, you have to analyze the games on two fronts, the level of play and the narratives. Now, level of play is obviously much more important. It doesn't matter how much hype or little hype a game gets prior to the actual showdown, the level of play is largely going to dictate how memorable the game is. If it's teams with absolutely no hype behind them, but it's really special, goes into overtime, it's going to be something you remember, it's going to be a great game. And if there's a lot of hype going into it, but it's a blowout, it's going to be a really disappointing, disastrous, potentially affair for the people watching. Now, the narrative still matters as well on two fronts. When you have a game with exceptional play, if it's meaningless, then you may just end up missing it. You'll be like, okay, 34-31, went into overtime, walk-off field goal, cool, but it wasn't like a divisional battle. It wasn't a dynasty-making showdown. It wasn't a huge rematch between two conference juggernauts. Those are the types of showdowns where you have that narrative going into it. Then it turns into something unforgettable. And the narratives also matter because if you don't have high quality of play in a game, but there's one particular call, there's one fight that breaks out between the teams, there's one thing that happens that isn't necessarily pure technically skill related to the game, it's something that you could be talking about, and it can make the weekend as a whole seem stronger, even though the games weren't all up to the same level of high quality.
Positive reinforcement. And McLaughlin's field goal from 27 makes it 33-zip. He should go in NFC North. And the kick.
It's good.
It's good. It's a winner.
I don't need to tell you that Colts Vikings was special, but what was interesting about it was that all the narratives about the game, all the stories that pundits are going to be talking about, weren't there. They were non-existent before the game started. It was only the fact that the Colts went up 33-0 that you had super interesting stories to talk about with this game, which all stemmed from just the fact that it was, in fact, the largest comeback in NFL history. The level of play, first off, was simply phenomenal. Patrick Peterson goes into the half saying that the Vikings defense isn't going to allow any more points after allowing 33 to be put on their head in the first half. Well, they only allowed 3, absolutely clamp up everyone on the Colts, including Michael Pittman, who I hate from fantasy football. Now, on the Vikings' offensive side, you have Kirk Cousins throwing for 400 yards in half. Jefferson and Cook are magnificent as always. KJ Osborne shows just how deep the wide receiving talent runs on that offense. And they still manage to persevere and win, despite the fact that the refs are getting in their way, trying to handicap them, calling back a score that clearly should have been theirs. And they send it into overtime 36-36 and win on a walk-off field goal, no time left, in a situation they historically are known to have poor luck in. You can take all the Manning and Brady matchups, you can take all the juggernauts of the AFC and the NFC colliding in a once-in-a-lifetime showdown, but there's nothing like this. There's nothing like seeing the NFL's biggest comeback in the league's history, even if you had Kirk Cousins and Matt Ryan squaring off. But the fact that it was Kirk Cousins and Matt Ryan also made it interesting that Kirk Cousins has been getting flack his entire career for not being good enough, for swindling teams out of money, despite the fact that his QBR, his numbers both inside and outside the red zone, are better than most of his contemporaries. Him and the Vikings show finally, after weeks of being called frauds, that their negative point differential over and over again by all these analysts on ESPN and other sites, they finally show that they can be NFC Championship contenders. On the other side of the ball, Matt Ryan, the football gods cannot be more cruel to him. He now owns the losing side of the biggest comeback in Super Bowl and regular season history. And Jeff Saturday, who there was kind of the sense that maybe the critics got it wrong after he beat the Raiders in his first week, and then afterwards he has just completely spiraled with this Colts team to the fact that maybe McAfee and these people that were calling for the defense of him were wrong, and maybe the critics, these analysts that spend their whole lives looking at this stuff, maybe they know something after all. This was just the total package of an NFL game. You even have the meme of Kirk being an absolute godslayer at 1 p.m. being furthered by the showdown. And it was a Saturday game, which in and of itself is special. Who doesn't love Saturday, December football? And then you had Browns-Ravens. and we're just going to ignore that. But then you had Bills-Dolphins, which had the benefit of having a narrative going into the game. Now the Dolphins, they're going to come out on the field and they're going to disintegrate like the Witch and the Wizard of Oz as soon as snow touches their body. That they can't compete in sub 50-degree weather, that they need the sunlight actually blinding them in order to play well, in order to function. That wasn't the case. It wasn't just that Bills-Dolphins wasn't a blowout, that it was a game where the lead was changing, that the Dolphins actually looked like they were going to squeak one by at one point. It was also the fact that it wasn't a snow game, that was constantly relying on the run, that where both teams had to constantly just punch it in over and over and over again, catch for a lucky break when they actually don't set the edge on defense, and run it for a score. It wasn't low scoring, it was very high scoring. The snow didn't actually inhibit the level of play that we saw, and the level of play was very high. You have Allen throwing caution to the wind as he risks his body on pretty much every single play like an absolute madman. Tua's completing passes, thank God, to the likes of Waddle and Hill, who show off their incredible speed, and even Wilson Jr., not Jeff Wilson Jr., but Cedric Wilson Jr., who used to torch the Eagles with the Cowboys, but is now finding a home with Tua. He was spreading the ball, he was doing his job, he wasn't turning the ball over constantly. It was an entertaining showdown, walk-off field goal win, an awesome Saturday of football. For the 1 o'clock games, you really only had 2 weak links. You had Falcons-Saints, which was still 3 points, 1-score game, and Steelers-Panthers, again, 1-score game with Mike Tomlin fighting, staying alive to try and keep his streak of never having a losing season in the NFL, which is interesting in and of itself, even if the game wasn't anything special. The other 4 1 p.m. games were quite strong, with 3 of them more than any other time slot this entire year representing the idea of any given Sunday. That it doesn't matter if you're an 11-3 team, there's a reason why all these people are professional athletes in the NFL. They can't trip you up, they can't upset you no matter how good your record is. If you're looking forward to a certain game on Christmas Eve with Philadelphia. Of course, it was cathartic for me as an Eagles fan to see Dallas blow it, but it was great for the nation. A 17-point comeback, walk-off pick 6 in overtime, another flashy, explosive game in which it seems so obvious that it's going to be a trap game, that Dallas is going to blow it. They somehow still do, even when it was so hard for them to blow it. It was so hard for them not to run out the clock on Jacksonville, and they still managed to do it. But it's not just about that Dallas is going to be Dallas. I'm glad that it was accompanied by such an impressive stat line by Rayshon Jenkins. 18 tackles, 2 picks on the day, the game winner, because it reminds you of the actual talent we're seeing. The actual fight by the Jags O-line to make Micah Parsons and the D-line seem a far cry from the 2000 Ravens that people were hyping them up to be. And Trevor Lawrence to be blossoming into that first-round pick that people thought that he was going to be. It was a 1 o'clock game that wasn't only just super exciting for the nation, but it was with a Jacksonville team that for years has not been a contender, potentially rising up and becoming a contender for years to come, and a preview of what they could be in the next 5 years. And the Chiefs and Eagles games were fun, although it would have been nice not to be so panicked at the end of the game. There's an undeniable talent to Justin Fields. You can't tackle him seemingly no matter what you do. And there could be, like the Jacksonville team, a really good future for the Chicago Bears going forward. When it comes to the Texans, that was just improbable. It was improbable that they took that team to overtime, but again, they've taken the Eagles, the Cowboys, and the Chiefs up until the last minute, sometimes into overtime, and it's a reminder of just the talent across the league. And to cap off the 1 o'clock games, a competitive game taken to the final minutes between the Lions and the Jets. Another cruel loss for the Jets, but for the Lions, 6 out of 7 wins. The ultimate feel-good story of the NFL with this coach Dan Campbell, a man with a heart of gold, but one of the coldest, most badass exteriors out of any coach in the NFL. It's awesome to see these 2 teams, despite the Jets' loss, be back into the somewhat respectable tiers of the NFL after so many years of being at the very bottom. The 4 o'clock slot was less impressive. Cardinals-Broncos, nobody cares. The Bengals did launch a comeback against the Buccaneers, even though the fact that it just was a comeback was about the only thing that was super entertaining about that game. But when it comes to Titans, Chargers, and Patriots, Raiders, let's get the elephant out of the room first. Patriots, Raiders, where you thought it was going to be carrying on with the momentum of the weekend, that the Patriots were going to come back and win it. In one of the most dumbfounding plays in NFL history, you see 24-24, a lateral to Jacoby Myers, and then a lateral straight to a Raiders defensive player. And they score off a walk-off lateral, even though it's tied and could easily go into overtime. The Raiders, and of all the organizations that get constantly cheated by feet, somehow defy it and win it when the Patriots needed this win more than anything else, and this has essentially knocked them out of playoff contention. You just can't make any of this up. And on top of that, you still have Justin Herbert throwing darts, getting one to Mike Williams late in the fourth to set up a field goal by Dicker the kicker, who grows his legend by the day. And you have a divisional matchup Sunday night between the Giants and Commanders, where the Giants win, keep the hope that all 4 NFC East teams are going to understand the playoffs alive, and you have a horrible blown call at the end that once again just brings into question the very sanity of the NFL refs and the people who are supervising them. What a weekend of football. Of course, I'm missing the comparative aspect to it. I'm sure there have been many weekends in NFL history for the regular season that can compete with this one. But this one definitely had an aura to it, where it wasn't just a clear winner when it came to the best regular season weekend of the year, but there were just so many different ways the games ended. You know, you would expect that the best type of football weekend is where everything ends on walk-off, overtime, but this wasn't even the case, where something like the Raiders-Patriots play was so unpredictable, so amazing to watch, where it seemed so evident that the game was going a certain way, that it was going to zig, and then it zagged in the other direction, and that seemed to be the NFL this weekend. There's only 2 ways, or 3 ways that a game can end: win, draw, tie, and yet there was just this sense of unpredictability to the weekend. There was a sense of specialty to it that is so rarely seen in the NFL, where most of the time, I feel, where I'm consistently watching during the year, I'm just trying so hard to watch something entertaining, to watch something special, where this year in particular, I felt that every single Thursday night game I've watched has been such a painful exercise in torture that it's not even worth tuning in to the primetime events anymore because of how disappointing they are. In this, it seemed like every single game was primetime, where I wish that the NFL was broadcasting every single 1 o'clock game at the same time, just to witness all the different dynamics that were taking place, all the different playoff scenarios that were forming, all these different narratives that are solidifying about these teams. It was just that good of a weekend. But I want to hear your opinion. What are your NFL weekends? What are the ones that stick out in your mind that can potentially compete with this one? And are there any overrated factors here that I'm perhaps looking past? Are there things that I'm overhyping? I'm all for the constructive criticism in this video. It's about time we have some NFL content on the channel when it seems so crucial, so pivotal to what I watch on TV. And that's it for Lightspeed Brothers today.